Good afternoon. My name is Enid Slack, and I'm the director of the Institute on Municipal Finance and Governance at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. On behalf of the board and staff of IMFG, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's panel on security breach, municipalities, and the cyber attack threat. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And I'm actually here at the University of Toronto today. I would like to thank the external funders of the Institute, Havana Capital, Maitree, the Neptis Foundation, the City of Toronto, the region of Halton, and the region of York. I would also like to thank Thomas and Piali at IMFG for putting this event together today, and the events and technical staff of the Monk School, Daria and Adam. If you are tweeting about this event today, our hashtag is IMFG Talks, and our Twitter handle is @IMFG Toronto. Today is the third in a series of 3 events that IMFG has been hosting on the role of Canadian municipalities in technology and the use of data. Today, we will be talking about cybersecurity. Our moderator today, as for the whole series, is Dr. Zachary Spicer. Zach is an associate professor in the School of Public Policy and Administration at York University here in Toronto. Before that, he was the Director of Research and Outreach at the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, IPAC. And way before that, Zach was a postdoctoral fellow here at IMFG. His research focuses on local government and innovation policy in Canada. So when I turn it over to Zach, he'll tell you a little bit more about the whole series that this event is in, and we'll talk about today's panel. He'll then introduce the panel, who will each make a brief presentation. He will then engage in a discussion with them before turning to you, the audience, to ask some questions. You can ask your questions at any time. You've all done this before. You know there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can pose your questions in at any time. So now, if I may, over to Zach.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And of course, thank you to Enid and the entire IMFG team for hosting today's event. So as Enid mentioned, this is the 3rd event in our series that the IMFG is putting on to explore how municipalities are adopting new technology and reacting to emerging digital trends. Throughout the series, we have been interested in mapping out where the challenges lay in the months and years ahead and providing local leaders with the tools that they require in a digital era. And of course, with this being the IMFG, a special focus has been on the finance and governance of the policy and regulatory approaches that municipalities take. The first event focused on the platform economy, and the second on smart city technology. Many thanks to those who were able to join us for both or for either. But if you missed them, the recordings are now available on the IMFG website, as will this event in the coming days. It's been a pleasure to moderate all of these sessions, and I hope that you've enjoyed these discussions. So as mentioned today, we are focusing on cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is something that may seem somewhat abstract to our lives, right? Think about hackers working anonymously to steal money and information. It feels like something out of a movie, or at least something that big corporations need to worry about. The reality, though, is that Cyberattack is a very real threat to a range of governments, both big and small. In fact, because of the large amount of sensitive data connected to both the personal information of their residents and the infrastructure that they operate, municipalities are prime targets. Capacity and resource constraints may even make them more attractive targets than some other entities. So cybersecurity and cyberattack can present unfamiliar terrain for municipal leaders. So this, of course, is a fast-moving and highly technical policy space. The demands of hackers can change, new threats can appear frequently, and the necessary protection is often costly and hard to fully understand if you don't have the needed technical background. So, what should municipalities do to prepare themselves? Thankfully, we have a great panel with us today to help dive into some of these issues. So, first, we have Kush Sharma. Kush is the Director of Municipal Modernization and Partnerships for the Municipal Information Systems Association of Ontario and served as the inaugural Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Toronto. Next, we have Laura Madison, who is a PhD student at the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she is writing her dissertation on local government cybersecurity. And finally, we have Sumit Bhatia, who is the Director of Innovation and Policy at the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. A more fulsome biography of each is available on the IMFG website if you're interested. So each of our panelists will begin today by sharing some brief thoughts about our topic. We'll get into a bit of a discussion with the panel, and then we'll open the floor up for your questions. So please feel free to write any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. So we'll begin today by hearing Kush. Kush, the floor is yours. I think you may be on mute, Kush.
Well, good afternoon. This is Kush Sharma. I represent MISA. Thank you for joining us today. MISA is a community of experts that has an objective to improve and enable municipal services via technology and digital transformation. And if we look at municipalities, they're really at the forefront of the cyber battle, right? They're the hands-on, day-to-day critical infrastructure practitioners that are trying to solve some of these major challenges we have in bolstering their cyber programs, whether it's funding or support or talent. So MISA Ontario specifically has kind of drilled down into this a little bit, and we're doing our first ever cybersecurity survey with several municipalities, starting a pilot in Ontario. Some of our key findings include, 85% of participants considered cyber a top 5 priority for the city or for that municipality. 75% of participants believed that there should be some sort of centralized cyber function going forward. And 92% of the respondents believed that there should be a focus on critical infrastructure more than the traditional network or IT security. So having said that, on a very high level, and these are tentative findings, we're still in the process of finalizing the report, but it's a clear indication of the thought process of the practitioners themselves, and that they realize the key trends in the market, the policy gaps, and then the movement towards maturity and the requirement to improve that. So what's the next step? The next step, in our opinion, is really to reach out more to our leaders, to the mayors and to councillors, to educate them and try to bolster that cybersecurity posture with the relevant talent, support, and funding. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kush. And next, we will hear from Laura.
Hi, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Enid, Thomas, Zach, and IMFG for hosting this important event and for the opportunity to participate. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a PhD student studying public policy, and I also have a graduate certificate in cybersecurity strategy and policy from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. In 2016, my colleagues and I at UMBC developed and administered the first nationwide survey of local government cybersecurity in the United States with the assistance of the International City-County Management Association. Although local governments have similar cybersecurity needs and requirements of small and medium-sized businesses, they are also public organizations providing a wide array of public and essential services that maintain large amounts of valuable personally identifiable information, making them attractive targets to attackers. What we found is perhaps unsurprising to you here, which is that local governments generally practice cybersecurity poorly, and they lack the required resources to improve. That is not to say that some local governments do not have good cybersecurity practices and management in place, especially larger, well-funded local governments. However, there are a little more than 90,000 local governments in the US, And if the majority do not practice cybersecurity well, then the country's overall attack surface remains overwhelmingly large and attractive to attackers, whether nation state or criminal. In 2016, the survey was administered to local governments with populations over 25,000 people, and we received a response rate of nearly 12%. We conducted additional research in 2020, which did show some overall improvement, but was a much more targeted survey of larger municipalities. However, many of the findings remain the same. Local governments had a difficult time tracking attacks, incidents, and breaches. 29% of our respondents did not even know whether their information systems had been breached. There were a number of significant do not know responses in our survey, and no cybersecurity official should answer they do not know an aspect of the organization's cybersecurity. When local governments were aware of and did track attacks against their information systems, we found that they were being attacked almost constantly. In 2020, 29% indicated being attacked hourly, and an additional 14% said daily. The largest barriers to local government cybersecurity have remained consistent in our research and the research of other academics and professional organizations, namely money. 4 of the top 5 barriers to local government cybersecurity involve funding. 1, inability to pay competitive salaries. 2, insufficient number of staff. 3, lack of funds. 4, lack of adequately trained personnel. And 5, lack of end user accountability. Additionally, our respondents indicated that top elected and appointed officials were not adequately aware of and did not provide adequate support for the cybersecurity division. Without adequate support, it is all the more difficult to provide adequate staffing and funding to this important function. Some smaller local governments may not have a dedicated cybersecurity official, let alone a sufficient number of IT staff. We witnessed considerable variation in the amount of cybersecurity staffing. 1 city reported no in-house cyber staff, and 1 reported as many as 24. Additionally, too small a number of local governments rated their technologies, practices, and policies at the level of best practice, 56%, 43%, and 31% respectively. Ultimately, effective cybersecurity requires more than the best tools and technologies, but also the management, policies, and practices in place to ensure those tools are used properly. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Laura. Thank you for sharing the results of that very, very interesting survey. I appreciate it. Let's turn finally to Sumit.
Thanks, Zach. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. And thank you again to the IMFG and their entire team for bringing us together for what I think is a very important and timely discussion. Once again, my name is Sumit Bhatia. I'm the Director of Innovation and Policy with the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. And just for some really quick background on the organization, the Catalyst is a national center for excellence in cybersecurity that focuses on 5 key areas of operations, training and certification, where we deliver reskilling and upskilling initiatives. We have a corporate training and cyber range arm where we help senior leadership and management understand how to build cybersecurity into their strategic planning frameworks. We operate a Catalyst Cyber Accelerator, which is a business accelerator for cybersecurity scale-ups, a public policy think tank that operates at the cross-section of privacy and cybersecurity called the Cybersecure Policy Exchange, and some of the work that we do in a public awareness space around supporting small and medium businesses and citizens across. The work that I talked about at our public policy think tank, the Cybersecure Policy Exchange, has been doing a tremendous amount of work in the space in supporting municipalities with both research and identifying gaps. I think in light of current events happening around the world, the conversation around protecting our municipalities with the looming threat of cyber attacks is probably more relevant than ever before. Municipalities are dealing with the tremendous pressure of managing cyber risk and resilience around the range of services they provide to keep our communities both operational and safe. Now, this is no easy task, given cyber criminals are honing into the vulnerabilities of this sector to exploit them for both monetary gains as well as social and political instability. And the pandemic has not made this easier because municipalities are also accelerating their digital transformation initiatives to keep up with the needs of both effective administration in the time of national and international crisis. Now, this past year, the largest majority of ransomware victims in Canada were critical infrastructure providers. And we saw this with attacks like the ones on Newfoundland's healthcare system in October 2021, or the Toronto Transit Commission, which we believe demonstrated the vulnerable state of our municipalities, the impact of such attacks, as well as the lack of coordination and resource sharing that continues to exist in the municipal ecosystem. You've, of course, heard from Laura and Kush on some of the statistics and numbers, which highlight the seriousness of this issue. But I will quickly point out some key challenges that our research has uncovered for us. That is very much in line with what my fellow panelists have also said. We know that municipalities are dealing with some legacy systems and aging infrastructure issues. This is the convergence of both OT and IT technologies that are driving automation and efficiency, but also leave us vulnerable. We're seeing them also very susceptible to supply chain attacks that are a result of a growing complexity of the global supply chain, coupled with what we believe are still archaic vendor management and due diligence practices. There's a lack of centralized control systems, as well as siloed business units, limited formal systems and processes around national level information sharing that makes it harder to learn from the mistakes of others. And we're seeing a real struggle around funding for municipalities as they look to the scale of investment that's required to overhaul their systems and processes and people. In fact, the Saskatchewan Urban Municipalities Association had said municipalities collect approximately 10 cents of each Canadian tax dollar, but are responsible for nearly 60% of the public infrastructure. And we know in its current state, Canada's infrastructure deficit is estimated to be between 150 billion to $1 trillion. We're also seeing limited funding affecting their ability to dedicate security-specific resources to bolstering their standards and practices, including establishing clear governance frameworks, which makes it very hard to address a cyber attack and deal with issues around incident response and business continuity. And lastly, as Laura pointed out, perhaps one of the most important issues, the shortage of cyber talent and the limited ability for smaller municipalities to attract good talent. So that's some of the things that we're working on and thinking about. And I'm glad to hear that my fellow panelists have highlighted some of these issues, and I'm looking forward to discussing these today.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. So I think we have we've laid the groundwork well. We'll open up the Q&A. Of course, if you have questions about anything that our panelists mentioned, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box. I have a couple questions though. So I wanted to first turn to Kush, if I could put you on the spot first. And looking at this is a pretty bewildering policy space for most municipal leaders, right? One looming question for some is whether they have the in-house talent to properly address cybersecurity risk. How do municipalities go about building internal capacity within this area? And is something like contracting out or seeking external consultants a viable strategy if in-house capacity does not exist?
Yeah, good questions. I'll start with the in-house part of that question first. So I think we need to think a little bit kind of outside the box or more innovative and kind of break down some of these silos in municipalities, right? They've been working in a certain way since inception. And they need to borrow some of the ideas from academia and private sector. So, one is the flexible work schedule. And so, the traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 coming in, clocking out for tech workers, specifically cyber, that does not exist anymore. And so if you look at the world and how, what the younger generations want, they don't want to be fixed to coming in at exactly 9 o'clock and exactly 5 o'clock they're leaving, right? So you got to give them flexibility of coming in and leaving. What, they do their 7.5, 8 hours, but they should have some flexibility on when they come in. And that has to be more aligned to the tech industry. So I think there's some investigation that needs to be done there. There are some municipalities that are a little bit larger that have adopted some of these ideas and are having more success in getting some of the younger talent and newer talent. We need to hire also from the business, from operational technology units and IT. So one of the things that we did when, at the City of Toronto as the inaugural CISO was we actually hired business people from the different divisions. We worked with our operational technology leaders and specific engineers in water, in transportation, etc., and then from IT, and we transition them over and train them on cybersecurity. So it could be people from procurement, from finance, from communications, from change management, etc. And this enriches the team. Plus, you have a pool of folks that already understand the processes of the city and how it works. So it's easier to train them on cybersecurity and get them ramped up rather than vice versa, where you have very technical cybersecurity people that are, you know, at very kind of low experience levels, wanting high salaries. You can just transition some of those folks over. The third thing is really you need to think about having a dedicated development budget. And what I mean by that is there has to be money set aside so there's some motivation for them. So in municipal government, right, there's not, you know, 30% bonuses like private sector. So it's really cost of living. So if you could provide some training, if you could send them to specific conferences or give them vendor training, very technical training, etc., then these are the smaller things that could be done, you know, with smaller budgets to retain folks, right? Consider also, you know, if we look at what the industry is, you know, going towards in Canada, and Alberta's kind of done it, is having a shared services model for cyber. So we know that most municipal organizations cannot afford a larger cyber organization. So those bigger cities, yes, they do have funding or additional funding and more people to take care of it. But many of them are medium-sized to small to very, you know, you might have 10 people, right, that work in IT. So there's no real cybersecurity function there. So we need to think about shared services, getting support from the provincial counterparts and partners, and then, you know, looking at regional activities. And the last thing in terms of in-house consideration is really enacting some sort of cyber reserve across Canada. And what I mean by this is you get vetted and cleared volunteers, similar to other functions in government, that can actually do work in cyber on a volunteer basis, right? And these are patriots of Canada that want to support the cities, want to protect the critical infrastructure, and they're ready to serve their country, right? Through what they can do locally. And, you know, this brings a sense of pride to the country, to the local municipalities, and gets the everyday citizen involved. From a contracting perspective, we've seen that from our survey, 85% approximately of respondents identified that there is a recruiting and retention challenge. 85% of municipalities. So the third party strategy, I think, already is widely accepted. So, you know, because they can't recruit and retain talent, then there's a strategy already in place for many years where there's a high capital expense, right? And there's a lot of consultants or third-party contractors, vendors. And we've seen from the survey that 54% of respondents said that reducing the dependency on contractors would actually benefit municipalities because they can reallocate those funds to OpEx and hiring more people, right? Especially in the northern regions. The trade-off here, though, is, you know, having those contractors to run the operations and to thwart those threats, right? Their knowledge retention is an issue, and then obviously there's higher costs involved with having third parties. Back to you, Zach.
Excellent. Thanks so much. You got me thinking a lot. So as someone who teaches in a program where we are training future public servants, it got me thinking a lot about how we're building out that sort of talent pipeline right from the very beginning. If I could stick with you, Kush, for just 1 second, I was curious about that recruitment piece. You mentioned sort of tech firms, and of course, there's a lot of talent out there. I guess the natural inclination for some of these graduates is to move more towards the private sector. What's the sales pitch aside from building a more flexible and inclusive and interesting work environment, what is the sort of sales pitch? Is there something there about public service that would sort of loop people in to sort of think about serving your community? Is that a viable strategy, or do we have to sort of think about something else?
Yeah, I think, the reason I had, kind of transitioned into private sector, public sector from private, is to share my knowledge and my experience and to help the community, help the city that I was born in. And now, with MISA, we're trying to take and gather, various experts in cybersecurity and help the entire community. And then we're going to expand that idea across Canada with our sister organizations. So I believe, the province is working on several items, but I think the education right from kindergarten needs to be implemented into our curriculum to actually create that awareness that cybersecurity is a viable profession. And there's two aspects to it, right? One, you can go to private sector and go that route. But second is if you want to serve your country, if you want to do something that's actually going to impact the citizens and the people that you live with on a day-to-day basis, if you want, there's stability also in a government job, right? There's other benefits there like pension and other aspects politically in terms of the reach and the networking and the visibility you get with officials, with government organizations, with private sector, public sector through the government is an awesome opportunity that you cannot get in private sector. So there's many aspects of the job other than financial that we should start focusing on and really going and selling that to the next generation, whether it's through higher education. I believe we should start all the way, from kindergarten. So by the time they get to higher education, many folks have already decided, or many children have already decided, young people have decided that they want they want to actively participate in serving the public. And the more technical minded students, cybersecurity is a viable option as opposed to doing networking or other IT functions.
Excellent, thank you. If we could turn to Sumit, one thing that's come up is sharing IT services and sort of cooperating between cities, and maybe even with other orders of government. Is IT service sharing or creating networks for sharing information and best practices a viable route to help municipalities secure against cyber threat?
Yeah, Zach, absolutely. We talked about some of the limitations that smaller municipalities face, limited capital investment, access to resources, and also I think large enterprise level players who can support local security initiatives, but they don't always have access to them. And that list goes on. And one of the ways we can address this issue is through a shared services model, which Kush pointed out to as well. Now, the shared services model itself can be organized in a few different ways. We can take a sector-specific approach where different players within a particular sector, such as healthcare, can come together to pool resources. We can look at a more provincially backed system that extends the benefits of a larger, more secure infrastructure and governance frameworks from big cities to some of our smaller municipalities, or we can take a hybrid approach to that as well. And when coupled with federal initiatives we're seeing now some momentum there that support critical infrastructure providers with assessments of operational resiliency and helps them frame their needs in relation to a larger national standard for cyber resilience, I think we'll start seeing a shared services model actually be able to have a positive effect. But I will point out that even with a centralized approach, there are some key challenges and considerations that we have identified, at least in our research, and we'll be talking about that and tabling some of that research soon. But I think it's important for us to keep in mind, and I know both Kush and Laura touched upon some of these, but one is we need to first and foremost have some centralized mandates and guidelines that allow a uniform approach to ensuring cyber resilience. That starts with mandatory assessments and reporting on cyber posture, so we know the scale of the issue that we're dealing with to begin with. And I think we haven't done an effective job of that quite yet. We also need to think about a more unified procurement process that includes sharing of vetted vendors, collaborative service agreements, as well as cybersecurity specific verbiage that holds different third parties accountable to cyber compliance. And then we need to ensure that we're creating a culture of cybersecurity, and that all levels of an organization need to be responsible for it, starting with council members and senior members of leadership teams in these business units. Now, this is probably one of the most critical steps to take and will require a really well-structured education and awareness program that Kush spoke about as well. And the last two things, which we talked about briefly as well, is funding and knowledge sharing. Now, funding support has to come from all levels of government, recognizing that investing in resilient infrastructure and capacity building will not only support a more secure cyber posture, but it will also assist with other initiatives, such as environmental and social impacts of our aging infrastructure. So there is that dual effect and impact. And we definitely need stronger and more coordinated intelligence sharing, vulnerability disclosure programs, and lessons learned that allow us to be proactive in these approaches. So I'm all supportive of a shared model, but I think we need to be careful and very thoughtful in how we structure it to really have that effect that we're hoping for.
Excellent, thank you. If you wouldn't mind if I put you on the spot again, I was wondering, where are we with some of these different conversations and some of these different initiatives? Have we begun getting serious about some of these things, or are we at the kind of initial stages? Where do we lay with some of this?
I believe we're taking some of those right steps. Unfortunately, cybersecurity doesn't allow you to be slow and thoughtful, and it requires you to take action at the same time. So I think we're seeing some tremendous initiatives being taken, of course, at the federal level with establishing standards. We're seeing some other organizations help with identify some of those standards for municipalities, especially focused on cybersecurity, and that work is happening. We're also seeing a tremendous amount of momentum in the education space. Kush pointed out some of those initiatives, but what I've really enjoyed watching in this space is that we are now taking some real alternative approaches to education. And it's a combination of post-secondary education, boot camps and specialized institutions that are focusing in on this, as well as some K-12 initiatives that are getting folks thinking about these. I also think we actually have an opportunity to really tap into the diversity and the wealth of our immigrant population in Canada, because they bring a tremendous amount of talent and diversity, which I think is critical to success in the cybersecurity space, and that's an ongoing discussion. I think we have to make some headway on the procurement side and procurement services, Kush pointed out some of the challenges around just centralizing this. I think we're seeing interest, but I feel like we now have to rapidly take action into building out some of these frameworks. But simply getting municipalities to talk to each other, creating platforms for that conversation, I think we've started doing that, but now we need to start taking action.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just a reminder, if any of our conversation thus far has sparked any questions for you, feel free to type any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and I'd be happy to pose them to our panelists. But for now, I want to move on to Laura, and I want to kind of flip things around a little bit and talk about residents. So when residents hear about a cyber attack on their local government, it's probably very natural to worry about the safety and security of your personal information, given that a municipality has so much of it, property tax records, you name it, right? I was wondering if you could clarify what information is vulnerable during these types of cyber attacks. What are cyber criminals really interested in, and what should individuals know about the cybersecurity of their local governments?
So there's honestly a wide variety of personally identifiable information, or PII for short, that's vulnerable during a cyber attack. It could span the realm from tax records, health records, student information, payment processing information, driver's license, social security, address, your login credentials, your passwords, the list goes on. And hackers are just mainly interested in what provides them money. And this information can be used individually or in together with all of the other information that's stolen to fraudulently make purchases, to commit identity fraud. There's a large number of ways that this information can be used, but most often what happens when a local government is suffering a cybersecurity breach or hack, or most often a ransomware attack, the government services, their IT services, are basically encrypted and held for ransom, or threatened to be destroyed or released publicly if the ransom isn't paid. And so as somebody who is a resident of Baltimore City, in 2018 and 2019, there were two massive hacks that the city underwent. One which disrupted 911 and 311 emergency services for a short period of time, but the other one was much more long lasting, and I couldn't pay my water bill for 10 months. And so, and also property purchases were suspended for a short period of time. And so disruption in services is more often what I think people will experience when they hear that their local government's been attacked. It is frightening that your public, or that your PII could be out there and it's sold for money. But if your personal information has been released or has been exposed, your local government should inform you directly that that's happened. So you can rest assured to a certain extent that if something that's directly connected to you is released, that you'll be informed. To be honest, I'm not sure about the rules on breach notifications in Canada, but at least in the United States, in certain places, that's the case.
Thanks. And I could just ask a follow-up. I was curious, is there a kind of a common route to resolution here? Is that if I'm a resident, am I reasonably sure that that my government is going to get my data back, or they're going to unfreeze the systems? Is there kind of a common path, or does it take a variety of twists and turns, I guess?
I think it depends on who is in power at the time and who's making decisions. Some cities and municipalities choose to pay the ransom in hopes that they'll get a decryption key quickly. But in many cases, sometimes the decryption keys works more slowly than just rebuilding the system from the ground up. And unfortunately, there really is no direct methodology of rebuilding your systems. I mean, the biggest thing that a local government could do would be to have a proper backup policy and actually engage in backing up your system regularly and storing them in a safe location, because you never truly know when the attack has hit. So you don't want to reboot off of a faulty backup.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. We have some questions coming in. I of course, have tons of more questions for you three, but I want to go to our audience first. I have a great question here from Ben Johnson about vulnerabilities in smart infrastructure. And Sumit, I was curious if I could go to you first on this one, because I know you have a bit of interest in this area as well. But are there any particular vulnerabilities for infrastructure, especially smart and connected infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we are starting to think about smart city initiatives at large, one of the big questions that keeps popping up is, are we building these smart initiatives on top of legacy systems? And that continues to be something that I think is widely being considered now. But up till now, in an effort to, especially with the IoT side of things, we've started seeing a lot of sensor-based technologies being integrated into existing systems. And that continues to be one of the key issues we have to deal with. The other, and perhaps building on the last question you asked, is around governance frameworks. As Laura was pointing out, some of the issues that we're dealing with around data and privacy is a function of a lack of strong governance models that have adopted to some of the workings of a smart city, or the modern city, or the modern municipality. And we continue to see that that to be a challenge, especially in the amount of data that gets collected. I'm certainly of the school that data itself poses a risk. And so we have to be very mindful of the reasons why we're collecting this data, how we're obtaining consent and maintaining agency for our citizens, and then also being able to think about issues such as anonymity, storage policies, and decision-making around these. So that continues to be a growing issue. I'd say the other big issue is keeping up with just the pace of technology and integration, and continuing to think about the role that we'll play. And that requires a bit of a planning and a strategic planning framework that is taking some of the growths of our industry into consideration versus just thinking about the current adoption of technology. And last thing, and this is something that could be contentious, but my thinking around smart cities is that smart and tech is not the same thing. Smart can often also be smart in our approach, in the time that we take to make those decisions, in the thought that we put behind onboarding different stakeholders. So I think from a security perspective, it's very important for us to continue to think about smart and tech as two parallel conversations. And those are just some of the things that are on top of mind.
And, thank you, Sumit, and thanks to Ben for the question. A question here from Leo on sort of typical ransom size, and Laura and Kush, either one of you would be well placed to sort of respond to this. Why don't we go to Laura first, if you don't mind, if I put you on the spot. Leo's curious, is there a typical size ransom demand for smaller municipalities around 20 to 50,000 population size? And have the culprits ever been caught? So again, kind of related to my question before about sort of resolution. What are cyber criminals after in terms of ransom size? And do we ever catch these guys?
Well, I really don't know about smaller size cities. For examples like that, what I've seen is number of police departments being attacked by, I would say, disgruntled citizens or people just wanting to show a particular point of view here in the United States. And I've seen ransom requests for as little as $1,000, $500, and they're just somebody who wanted to take out a grudge against their police department for who knows what. And but for cities the size of like Atlanta or Baltimore, which are around 600,000 people, they tend to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe not even $1 million. But the costs of recovering from these breaches tend to be in the tens of millions. So for Baltimore, I believe it was $17.5 million it cost to recover. And then for Atlanta, it was somewhere in the realm of close to $20 million. So the costs are really high. The ransom sizes, they try to see what they can get away with. And sometimes it can seem onerous, but they do want to entice people to pay. So they sometimes seem a little bit smaller than you would guess, but they go with what works. And yes, some of these people have been caught, which is why I've been able to describe some of the local citizens that are disgruntled and defacing websites and going around doing that. But when it comes to criminals, large-scale criminals and nation-state actors in the US, we have charged people with crimes, but I don't imagine we're running around Iran or other places trying to extradite them back to the United States.
Excellent, thanks so much. Kush, did you have any thoughts on what we've seen here in Ontario or here in Canada about sort of a typical ransom size, or does it tend to vary here as well?
Yeah, I think it varies, but what we need to keep in mind is once they come after you and if you pay the ransom, what's happening today is they'll come back again. So they'll give you the key, ransom you again, and this is usually happens, at least minimum of 2 times. We're seeing 3 times now. So these are criminals. So you have to understand that they're criminals, right? They're not law-abiding citizens. They're going to come after you multiple times. So you need to come up with a strategy and a plan and operationally, have the right resources to help with this situation. The other aspect that we're seeing now is that they're actually going after the insurance companies. So they're trying to figure out what your insurance policy is, where it's kept, which insurer, how much you're insured for. So let's say you're a larger city in Canada and you're insured for, between $20 to $50 million. So now they know that they have a ballpark of $20 to $50 million, and smaller municipalities might be $500,000, $1 million, maybe a few million for some of the medium-sized ones. It depends. And so they'll ask you for that ransom and the full amount, because they know that you can pay it through cyber insurance. And what's happening in the cyber insurance industry now, specifically for municipalities, they're not getting insured anymore because the risk is so high. They don't have the funding, capability, or resources to have robust cybersecurity. So the policies are not getting approved or not getting renewed. And so this concept of self-insurance has to be looked at seriously, going forward. These are the trends we're seeing in the last 6 months to a year.
Excellent. Thank you, Kush. Sumit, I saw your hand up. Did you want to jump in here as well?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I just wanted to again mention, I think cyber criminals are very careful of knowing your ability and capacity to pay. And they sort of set those amounts based on the size of your municipality or the particular sector they're targeting. So that's something to keep in mind, is that they're quite aware of those, and they set those standards accordingly. I think the other thing that Kush just pointed out is just they're also aware of some of the loopholes that exist in cyber insurance. And that continues to be a problem. I'll just mention something, which has been really interesting development over the last week or so around the part of the question that said, are cyber criminals getting caught? And I think, one is cyber criminals are operating in a very organized way today. They're operating in a very collaborative format, in a software as a service model, as a, ransomware as a service model. So one group getting caught doesn't change that other players are probably targeting very similar targets and regions. But one thing that just happened over the last week that we saw is the collaboration happening between private sector and the public sector right now in combating some of these attackers. And one of the things we've just seen is coming out of the new Viper malware that we saw coming out of Russia targeting Ukraine, but also other North American cities, and where we've seen organizations like Microsoft step up to the plate and actually collaborate both on the intelligence sharing side as well as targeting some of these. So that is a really, really positive, I think, movement that we're seeing, is the public sector and the private sector actually taking both a defensive and an offensive approach to targeting these issues, which I feel, in addition to getting cyber criminals caught, is a positive step in defending ourselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kush, I was wondering if I could go back to you for a question here about sort of convincing council and senior management about investing in IT. So Jons, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, lives in a northern city in Canada, and they have a very, very tight budget. And they don't have any sort of cybersecurity resource team internally. And they're interested, what's the best strategy to convince council and senior management? And they're asking you if you have any sort of resources that could be shared. But internally, how do you sort of build imperative to invest in cybersecurity if you have a council and senior management that is somewhat hesitant to invest resources here?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think the first thing that we should consider, and what I've done in the past, is I immediately started documenting incidents. I started creating a metric book. And so I worked with my IT across various domains, whether it's network, endpoints, policy, governance, business applications, projects. We immediately went and started collecting metrics and understanding what is actually happening with the tools and technologies that you currently have. So that's one. And then you build that playbook, and then you actually have facts and figures. You're not just quoting, the MISA Ontarios and the Ryersons and other reports coming out of the US, et cetera. But you actually have concrete facts that are specific for your municipality, and then you supplement them with all these reports, right? To prove that across Canada, across the US, across the world, this is something that's actually happening. These are facts, this is objective. And so that is number one. Second, you may want to consider actually speaking directly once you have your facts and your presentation ready directly to the council. My approach was always doing it individually, one-on-one, and you could have a 15-minute conversation with a few slides, right? Nothing extensive, explaining what is actually happening in the city, right? On a day-to-day, weekly or monthly basis. How many attacks are coming in? How many protections do we have? How many deficiencies do we have in terms of, you know, if you have any audit reports, et cetera? And how many privacy impact assessments are not being done for X projects? So these are simple things that can be put together. And then you have that quarterly meeting with each counselor. And so that raises their awareness directly, and they will ask you questions. It could be anything. They might ask you about, how do I secure my cell phone, to, oh my God, there's so many attacks, what should we do, right? What do you recommend? And then that is your opportunity to convince them and to get them to champion you, right? Directly from the folks that make the decisions for the budgets. And so I don't think you'll see a drastic increase immediately, but what you will see is a gradual increase in support, in funding, in potentially people. The other thing is maybe having, you know, a special report or something, at least on a quarterly basis, to all your leaders in the city. So your division heads, city executives, that is maybe it's an internal document that you can publish and highlight the key issues. And then once, you know, folks are very competitive. So if they see that one area has done all their cybersecurity training, right, you know, and another area has not, they're going to push their people to do it because they don't, you know, they want to support that idea. They understand that it's important. The other thing is work with your counselors, work with your city managers to help push it through the province. What I mean by that is there needs to be regulation changes, right? So this is huge, and it has to be everyone going to the province and telling them to create the regulation for cybersecurity, right? We have something for privacy, we have nothing really for the public sector for cybersecurity. So that regulation change has to really come to enforce some of these things. And then really, if you really want to think out of the box, look for opportunities with your IT team or with your business units, with your operational teams to partner with private sector to create revenue generation kind of initiatives. So maybe you could partner, and then, you know, as part of the, you know, some of the service fees that the city gets, a percentage goes to cybersecurity because it's a safety issue. So part of that safety issue, part of that revenue goes into a specific fund, and then you're generating revenue and you're becoming a, you know, more like a profit center as opposed to cost center. So, you know, thinking about how a profit center is set up and what you can do to get to profit center status, that will immediately change the minds of the council and the citizens and the leaders, because now you're actually generating your revenue generation mechanism, right? You're a division that intakes the money as opposed to outtakes. So these are some of the things that you could think about. I'm happy to discuss, you know, offline with anyone on the call today, and they can get my contact information from the Monk School.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kush. Shervin here has a question about residents again. And Laura, I wonder if I could turn to you just to sort of continue our thought process about sort of residents. So, they're curious if you could share any innovative approaches to the general public education on cybersecurity matters that could help to reinforce municipal efforts to secure public data. Is there anything that you may be able to sort of share in terms of educating the public around cyber threats?
So I can share some unique examples of what I've heard, what's been happening in the US. One thing that I would recommend to do is steer away from fear. I think fear-based motivations are not necessarily the best. And I think a lot of people are just generally overwhelmed with how much they're being told to do in order to protect themselves on the internet. You know, as simply as just clicking an agreement to use an app. But One interesting thing that I've seen is the Department of Homeland Security, CISA here, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They have some comic books that they've been releasing to try to get more people interested, especially youth, in the topic. I think that mostly my advice would be to just steer away from fear. People kind of shut off and don't listen to it. I think that if you try to engage them in something positive or patriotic, as people were saying earlier, like doing your duty, being of public service, helping those around you, I think is a better tool and mechanism to spreading awareness.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we only have a couple minutes left, but Sumit, I was curious if I can give you the final word here, based upon a question from Natasha. It touches on something that you were mentioning before about cooperation with other governments. Natasha's interested about what is the role of the federal government in helping municipalities navigate some of these issues. Just curious if you could talk about the federal role, federal presence, anything that the federal government could do to support municipalities in this regard. Maybe even the province as well, if you wanted to sort of touch on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, I think one of the places where the federal government can really take lead is in setting standards that can be adopted at a national level. We are seeing some of that work happen already. There's two things that we're seeing that are starting to have some positive effect. One, of course, is building a cybersecurity tool set, which allows a lot of municipalities and different types of organizations to understand what assessment looks like from their unique perspectives and review what their operational resilience and cybersecurity maturity looks like. And I think the federal government is taking some initiatives there, and that work is going to have to continue. We're also seeing different parts of the federal ecosystem start to participate. Public Safety Canada offers a really comprehensive resilience assessment, which I think we have to continue to build on and grow. I think we've done a good first initial step in creating that program, which is the Regional Resilience Assessment Program called the RRAP program, that we've seen have some very positive effects, but that work continues to expand. And I think as we look ahead, we've got to see the development of the National Infrastructure Assessment Program, which we're again seeing some work happen around there. But purely at a municipal level as well, Zach, as you asked, there's a lot of different pieces for us to work through. The shared services model that we talked about is a good step. But one area of particular focus for me is around the procurement side, is how do we build a vetted vendor of record? How do we share service agreements within different groups and municipalities? How do we start thinking about adding, cybersecurity clauses that hold our vendors accountable and different decision makers within that framework accountable? And I think those are some steps that can be taken both at the federal level as well as at the provincial and municipal levels that are going to advance this mandate forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just looking at the time, we are out of time, but I wanted to thank all of our fantastic panelists. It's been a wonderful discussion. I think we probably could have talked for a couple of hours here. So thank you all very, very much. And apologies to everyone who couldn't get to your questions. They're all fantastic questions, but thank you everyone for joining us today. And I want to very quickly throw it back to Enid for some concluding remarks. Thanks again, everyone.
Well, thanks very much, Zach. Boy, that hour went by quickly, and there were some great questions from the audience, which we will share with the speakers. From a finance and governance perspective, because that's what we look at IMFG, the importance of collaboration among all orders of government and the private sector is a really important takeaway from today. Of course, everything comes down to funding, somebody said, and that's also something that we look at a lot at IMFG. But I certainly like the line that we can't be slow and thoughtful. This is something that is moving quickly, and we have to move quickly and think quickly. It's a scary area. Laura talked about fear, and we all are afraid of cyber attacks. But I have to say, after today's session, I am very encouraged that these great minds on our panel today are working on this topic. both at an academic level and also in government and in the community. So thank you very much, Kush, Laura, and Sumit. Thank you, Zach, for moderating today. You've done a great job in the 3 sessions we've had pulling it all together. And Zach is going to put a paper together for IMFG that summarizes all 3 panel discussions. We've also recorded the event today, as I think you've already heard, and that recording and the recording from the previous panels will be on our website shortly. So again, thank you to the panel, to Zach, and thank you to the audience for coming today. Have a great afternoon.